Okay, we've moved on from John chapter 6, right? We are now in chapter 7, the events, right, after the feeding of the 5,000 plus, right, with 5,000 men with women and children, and all that, and then the aftermath of that, and all those things. Okay, we've gone on from there, and this is now, we enter into chapter 7. Now, this is a little bit of time after chapter 6. And here, as we begin, I want us to realize, right, increasingly as Jesus is involved and, very active in his public preaching ministry, there is growing support, right? There's a growing group of disciples and followers, which in the last chapter, what we saw was that he also was actively discouraging. Because why? He knew the hearts of all men. Right? Not everyone was committed, not everyone was serious. Some were following the crowd, some were curious, some, all these things. And so he actually sent a number of them back. All right, and as we ended chapter 6, he posed a question to the rest of his remaining disciples. He said, okay. And basically he said, okay, what about you guys, right? Will ye also go away? Because why? It has to be a personal decision and choice. Right? Some have joined the crowds. Why? Because there's a crowd. Right? You and I get that, right? There's a crowd. There is a queue for this char kway teow stall. And guess what? Human logic dictates, well, if there's a long queue, this thing must be good. I don't want to be missing out, right? The fear of missing out, we call that what? FOMO. People will follow, but for the wrong reasons. People will follow because of free food, right? People will follow because of relationships, right? Because of my friends, right? Because of my mom and dad, because of my wife, because of my husband, and so on and so forth. Now, Jesus actively discouraged them because, right, unless we come to him for the right reasons, right, we're not ready. Now, there was also another type of response, and which was that as his ministry grew, there was more and more opposition, right? More and more opposition, there was more resistance, there were increasing groups of skeptics, right? They were skeptical not because they did not have the information, not because they didn't know, it wasn't because of ignorance, but it was a willful choice, it was a decision. In spite of the miracles, in spite of all his teaching and preaching, which would be easily supported by the scriptures, right? And he was authenticated, yet they chose not to believe, right? It was a willful decision and choice. Now, everything comes back down to an act of the will. Obviously, your will cannot save you. But there has to be a conscious understanding that we need help, and then a decision that I want to seek help. And then there's one more. Okay, some of us, if you're involved, whether in healthcare, right, mental health care also, or you're a caregiver, the person has to want to receive help. Okay, because if they're not willing to receive help, there's nothing you can do about it. You can't force that on a person. And likewise, the same way, even with God's gift of eternal salvation. All right? It is offered freely. It's available. Right? Offered. It can be received by grace, right? Through faith. But are you willing? Are you willing to receive? Are you willing to accept it? Now, those that were hostile, we see this is growing, and as we come to chapter 7, what we're going to see is this. Jesus must continue with his mission, right? His task, which is to not only preach the gospel, right, to call people to repentance and faith, but then after that to actually work out that plan of salvation, right, by going all the way to the cross at Calvary. Now, the thing that he's facing now is just because, right, the atmosphere, the climate is not favorable, right? The audience is not favorable. The question before us is, does that mean we stop what we do? Right? Does that mean we stop what we do? Does that mean, okay, well, people don't like it and they're throwing rocks at me or whatever, so what do I do now? Do I quit? Do I stop? That's one of the options. All right? For some, their choice would be, well, I'm just going to go head on directly and I don't care. That's another possibility. But my question is this. Are there just two options? Or is there another way? And I put it to you here in these first 13 verses, right? We see Jesus pursuing a different option. Right? He was creative in his problem solving. The obstacle was there. It's obvious. Okay, and I need to remind everyone, right, that even over the last nearly 4 years now, as we began, whatever, we had to deal with obstacle after obstacle after obstacle for the last almost 4 years now. And what Jesus did was to seek out an alternative way, rather than to say, well, cannot be done, let's not do anything. Neither did he say, well, we're just going to defy everybody and we're just going to do it our own way, because that also not going to work. And this was a challenge that he was facing when, as we talk about right today, our topic for today, truth-telling in hostile times. Right? Hostile environment and climate, yet how do we tell the truth? Right? And so we begin with the first part, right, that we need to recognize the reality. Right? Recognize the reality of the situation. Now look at verse 1. Now, after John chapter 6, we see that Jesus continued. He remained in Galilee. Right? After these things, Jesus walked in Galilee. Right? For he would not walk in Jewry because the Jews sought to kill him. Right? So now, I want to be very clear about this. Right? This period after these things, it's talking about a period of time between chapter 6 and chapter 7. Now, approximately about 6 months. Okay, after those events, he had avoided certain places because there was a growing hostility, right, by the Jewish leadership against him. Now, I want to point out, it's not because he is a coward. Okay, remain up there in Galilee, and if you look at the map, which it's in the slides there. Now, the word Jewry refers to the southern region of Judea. Okay, whereas he remained up in the north, right, in Galilee. He didn't go down south towards where Jerusalem would be. Okay, very often this term will refer to the region around Jerusalem, whereas Nazareth, where his hometown, is a town up in Galilee. Now, he remained there. Why? Because just forcing the issue at this time is counterproductive. Right? It's not going to solve the problem. Now, this wasn't the first time that they wanted to kill him, because it's just that the momentum has been increasing. If you go back to John chapter 5, verse 18, you'll see, right, therefore the Jews sought the more to kill him because he not only had broken the Sabbath. How did he break the Sabbath? He healed someone. But said also that Jesus was his Father, making himself equal with God. Now, they understood exactly what he was saying. So it's not about ignorance or whatever. They understood, they got his message, but the thing was this, they refused right? Despite the authentication, the miracles, they refuse to accept him as the Son of God. So now they bring on the charge of heresy and blasphemy, right? Because why? He is equating himself with God, the Son of God. Okay. By the way, just a very quick note here, right? In the Old Testament, you'll see if the Jews are, at this point, right, understood this that about the Son of God, they recognize, right, the Son of God is God Himself also. Now, instead, what did Jesus do? Right? I don't know, past decade or so, or past few decades, right? There's this term, right? What would Jesus do? Now, how did He deal with this? Well, Jesus chose to act with wisdom and timing, right? The right timing for the right thing is very important. Proverbs 2:25 verse 8, now said, go not forth hastily to strive, lest thou know not what to do in the end thereof, when thy neighbor hath put thee to shame. Right? We're told not to just be impulsive, right? To just push out hastily. By the way, time out here, because a lot of times pastors try to drive, and they try to push. And I've seen so many times a lot of hasty behavior and action. Now, it doesn't mean because you're hasty that you're hardworking for the Lord. All right? I've been criticized, attacked many times over the last 20 over years. Why? Because when I refuse to give in to that kind of impulsive behavior, and then people expect the pastor to like, oh, you must be hard driving and to push. I've been criticized for so-called my weak leadership. Now, I'm clear on one thing. You need to know what is the right thing to do. We don't want to be busy, rushing, pushing very hard for something that doesn't make sense, or that it's not going to work for us, or that we're not going to be effective, right? And sometimes, in fact, very often, it's about timing, the right timing. Right? Men, I mean, let me ask some of the men here. Now, if you look back, you're going to recognize something. If not for the right timing, you probably would not be married to your wife. It's not just the right person. Timing has a very big factor in a lot of things. Right? In our lives, right? In relationships, jobs. Okay? Just because it's the right thing doesn't mean that it's the right time. And we ought not to be hasty. We ought to be looking towards the Lord as to what is the right time. Now, He was also strategic in making the next move. Now, realize this, right? It's not just about action. The thing I cannot stand as far as being a spiritual leader is concerned is when there is a lot of emphasis on mindless action. When people want everybody, when there's this push that, let's have everyone busy, right? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, all the way to Sunday in church, right? And we want everyone to run around like a headless chicken. Now, I always put my foot down and draw a line there in the sand. Because why? It doesn't make sense. Should we, right, put first things first, prioritize the Lord, and all that? Yes. Should we be busy in the work of the Lord? Yes. But we should not be busy just for the sake of looking like we are doing something. You get what I'm saying here? Not just because so that we feel good about ourselves that we are doing something, when we step back, actually nothing really got done. We expended a lot of energy, maybe we spent a lot of money. All right? I put it to you that there is very poor stewardship, right, of time and money before the Lord. And so He is strategic about this. It's not just acting or taking action for the sake of looking like He's doing something. Now, Proverbs 24, verse 5 and 6, a wise man is strong. Very interesting. Right? We usually think people who think a lot, right, aren't strong. They're intellectuals, maybe. Or they may be very wise, but But here it says, a wise man is strong. Yea, a man of knowledge increases strength. Why? Because where there is knowledge and there is understanding, it is a force multiplier. It multiplies what you're able to do. Now, in other words, we're no longer just doing things because of brute force. You get what I'm saying here? Because you can try to do things just with brute force. Okay, this doesn't work. We can't move the car. Okay, that's fine. Let's get more people, more men, and we'll push the car. Why not? Let's just get someone who actually has the car keys, go in, turn on the engine, and then drive off. Right? Knowledge, it says, increases strength. Now, then it says, for by wise counsel thou shalt make thy war, and in multitude of counselors there is safety. So here you're going to see, right, that there in the wise counsel, now you need to get good advice. Okay? Good advice doesn't come from just, well, here's my good friend, I trust my friend. It has to do with, do they know what they are talking about? Do they have expertise, knowledge, whatever, or experience in this area? I always say, never take advice on hair grooming from a person that does not have hair. Okay? I don't take parenting advice from people who do not have children. All right? Drivers, right? You don't take advice from people who sit in the back seat. Very annoying. Yeah, Clifton, you say, yeah, all right. Football teams don't take advice from people who sit at the sofa there yelling at the TV. Now, here by wise counsel, what happens? Thou shalt make thy war. Now, the whole operation of warfare is very complex. Okay, there are a lot of things that you actually have to consider. It's not just a matter of, okay, everyone just wave your swords and then we go out, yeah, we charge out there. It doesn't work that way. And then it says, in a multitude of counselors. Now, a multitude means also there will be differing opinions, differing points of view, which is important because why? They may reveal something that you and I did not notice, did not think about. Right? And so, and take note, right? Because in our culture today, a lot of times that if someone tells us something that is not what we want to hear, we say, okay, I don't want to listen to you anymore, right? All you guys, you're always criticizing me, or you're all these haters, we're not going to listen. No. Hey, listen, sometimes people will tell you, people will go to the trouble of telling you something you don't want to hear because, right, they care about you. If I'm your enemy and I hate you, I will say nothing. I'll just let you go to your doom. I'll buy popcorn along the way and watch. Why? Because why go to the trouble? Most of us, it's very natural. We want to be liked. We want to be loved. So why create trouble for ourselves? Now, here he was strategic about that move, and there is a right time and a wrong time to speak. All right, Proverbs 15, verse 23, a man had joy by the answer of his mouth, and a word spoken in due season, how good it is. Now, this tells us, you and I need to have godly wisdom, not just about how we use our tongue, what we say, right, what we speak, but when we do it. Right? The timing is important. And here, notice, by what we say, right? Is it now a word spoken in due season, in the right time? Oh, how wonderful it is. Right, to the one who hears this. Now, but rolling back, there is still a problem, right? Because the Lord Jesus Christ, now he's on a mission from God to do the Heavenly Father's will. Now, this is something he cannot do nothing. Right? This is non-negotiable. Anytime we have to do something, right, that the Lord has commanded us, that is laid out in his word, now it is not negotiable. But Pastor, doesn't that mean that it puts us into a dilemma? It seems to be. Now look at verse 2. Now the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles was at hand. Right? Now this Feast of Tabernacle, right, was coming around the corner, and all the men who are faithful Jews, what's going to happen? They're expected to be in Jerusalem. Right? They're expected to be there for the feast. And so realize this, they will have to make the journey wherever they are, right? Whether they're up north in Galilee or down south of Jerusalem, wherever, they would travel all the way back there to attend the feast. Now, so Jesus had to face and resist the pressure to take action just because he's expected to do something. Okay, he's facing that. He has to face also the very human thing that all of us will face. We do not look forward to dying. Right? We don't look forward to facing hostility or violence. It's not something we welcome. So again, it leads to the question, what would Jesus do? And so we need to realize he recognizes the reality, but we also need to recognize the requirement. What's this requirement? Well, again, verse 2, it said, now the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles was at hand. It is commanded of the Lord, right, for the Jews to attend this festival, to be present there. It's an important holy festival that God gave to the children of Israel to keep every year. Now, Leviticus 23, verse 34, and we're going to just get a bit of background here to understand this. And he speak unto the children of Israel, saying, the 15th day of this seventh month shall be the Feast of Tabernacles for 7 days unto the Lord. Now, this was on the seventh month, the month of Tishri, and it would last for 7 days. Then it's followed by one more day where there is a solemn assembly. Okay? 7 days. And so what was the purpose of this, right? Why would they do that? Well, jump with me down to verse 42 and 43. Now, the purpose was to commemorate, right, what God did, right, in Israel, in Egypt, and in the wilderness, right, and to teach that to a new generation. Verse 42, ye shall dwell in booths 7 days. All that are Israelites born shall dwell in booths. Okay? Now, these are like little shelters. Okay? It's improvised. Right? Maybe, if you think of a booth, now if you go to a trade show, you'll see, right, there's a booth. Okay, you usually will have the four corners. Maybe, I think that there may be a roof, right? And it's a temporary shelter. Right, it's a temporary place. Now here, it says, what was the reason that they will live there, not just for 7 days, they will eat, sleep, right? They'll be there with their families and all. Now, it says here, that's so that, right, that your generations may know that I made the children of Israel to dwell in booths. When? It says, when I brought them out of the land of Egypt, I am the Lord your God. Now, what was the purpose? It remembered God's provision in the wilderness. Right? It was a reminder of God's power to take the children of Israel out of bondage, out of Egypt, right? Crossing the Red Sea, and then into the wilderness. Right? It pictured this living by faith. They went from place to place, and you will see this, right? Following God, trusting Him, that God knew what He was doing. Without any resources, you notice one thing. This is not a permanent home. Right, this booth. Okay? Any wife or mother, one very major concern would be always having a roof over your head. Right? To own your home rather than to be living for the next 30, 40 years renting a place. You want the security of that. Now, they went through 40 years in the wilderness without all that. Living in temporary shelters as they move from place to place. Trusting God that He will take care of them. Look at verse 40 of Leviticus 23. And he shall take you on the first day the boughs of goodly trees, branches of palm trees, and the boughs of thick trees and willows of the brook, and he shall rejoice before the Lord your God 7 days. Right? So they will use all these building materials, right? Whether it was good trees, the palm trees, the branches of palm trees, probably for the roof and for the flooring, right? The boughs of thick trees and also the willows. Now, all these things are the basic materials that they'll use. They'll improvise, they'll build these booths, and they're going to stay there for 7 days. Now, all this also pictured, right? Israel's full dependence on God and celebrated the final harvest of the year. Now, this was the time after the final harvest of the year, they were all gathered there for this feast. We see in Nehemiah chapter 8, right? This practice was revived during Nehemiah's time. Nehemiah 8, verse 14, and they found written in the law, not just in the Old Testament, right? It said, in the law which the Lord had commanded by Moses. So which books are they? The first few books of the Bible, right? The books of Moses. Now here it says, the Lord had commanded by Moses that the children of Israel should dwell in booths in the feast of the 7th month. Okay? So now what happens is this. During Nehemiah's time, they had already returned from captivity, right, back to Jerusalem. Now, Nehemiah's big major task was what? The rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem, right? The protective walls. And from there, the work of finishing the temple would continue. Now, but here, what happened was this. Along the way, now they had discovered scrolls, right, in the Old Testament law, and they found there was very specific instructions about this feast, which, in other words, by implication, they didn't know anything about. Why didn't they know anything about? Well, remember, the people who had resettled back there, right, coming out of Babylon, they had been away in captivity for 70 years. In other words, that 70 years, they've never seen the observance of this feast. Okay? Many of them, notice they're discovering this for the very first time in the scriptures. Okay? Now, the question will be, how will you and I respond? Because you and I can be here, we can come every Sunday, whatever, we're listening to the teaching, the preaching. Now, I have been there before, right? Sitting there, listening to the preacher, to my pastor, whatever, and then suddenly I realize, oh, I've never heard this before. Or how come it's like I've never heard this being taught, right? Because very simple, I didn't read it in my Bible, right? I didn't read my Bible, or I didn't read that part, or I didn't study that in detail. I didn't pay attention, whatever it may be. But the things, once you and I are confronted with that, now what do we do? And here, the people got together. Now they resolved that they want to do something about it. Look at verse 17. And all the congregation of them that were come again out of the captivity made booths and sat under the booths. Wow. There was a determination, there was a resolve, right? That, okay, it's not our fault. We were ignorant. We didn't know about this before. Whatever, we didn't have the scriptures. Now that they have the scriptures, they read this out of the law. What happens? They were resolved. We must do something about it. Why? Okay, and I want to underline one key thing throughout this whole message here is that where God has laid out certain things by way of commandment, by principle, things that we need to do, it is not negotiable. You know what I'm saying here? What the things of God, what we need to do, we need to do. Now, can there be flexibility as to how we're going to arrive there? Yes. But we have to determine that if God has spoken, it must be obeyed. Okay? Now, I recognize, as pastor, and I've been through this myself, through, with Janice, myself, through our lives and our family. Now, we recognize sometimes we're not there yet. But we determine, that's the direction we're headed. We will continue to hit that direction. And even if it's not perfectly, never mind. We keep going, we keep trying, and we keep improving on that till we get there. All right, but here, all the congregation, now, those who were there in Jerusalem, now they came out, they made those booths for the very first time in their lives. All right, and sat under the booths. Now, then it tells us this, right? For since the days of Yeshua, the son of Nun, unto that day. Who's this Yeshua? Joshua, son of Nun. All right, Joshua who led them after Moses into the land of Canaan. Now, what happens? It says, had not the children of Israel done so, and there was very great gladness. Now, what it's saying here is they restored the practice, all right, of going back after returning to the land. Now, this was at a level of participation and a level of enthusiasm and joy that had not been seen since Joshua's time. Wow. In other words, it tells us here, they did this with great gladness or joy. It wasn't like, oh no, great. Nehemiah, you really made my day, right? Now you give us one more thing that we have to do. As if we don't have enough things to do already. Why are you always creating work for us? All right, I know some of y'all do that, right? The moment you come in on Monday to work, and then it's like, this boss or this co-worker, whatever, they're always creating extra work for us. Now, here, and by the way, I've seen this so many times in church, right? People, we point out something that is there. I didn't make it up, right? I didn't come up with a new commandment. It's there. This is in the scriptures, what happens, but everyone acts as if, I don't like this pastor. He's always creating extra work for us. As if our lives are not hard enough now. But here, you notice, it was with great joy. They were excited. They were like, wow, we're doing this. I don't know what this is. This is new for the very first time. And then look at verse 18. And also day by day, from the first day onto the last day. Now, this is Nehemiah. He read in the book of the law of God. The scriptures, you notice, they didn't just come together so that they sit there, play cards, drink coffee, tell stories. What happens? They came together, and then this was attended by the reading of the scriptures, right? He read out of the book of the law of God, and they kept the feast 7 days. Okay, there's feasting. Hey, 7 days. Clifton, good, right? But then notice, on the 8th day, and on the 8th day was a solemn assembly according unto the manner. What manner is this? According to the scriptures. Right? Now, in other words, whatever it was that they needed to do, they were very careful about making sure that they follow what the Word of God says. Not only that, they did not treat this as optional. I'm sure the very first time they did this, there was room for improvement. A lot of things can be improved, but they started. Dearly beloved, start. All right, this is the beginning of the new year. Whatever it may be, you may think, oh, this is bad, I'm struggling, or it's difficult, or I'm trying to get my Bible reading, or whatever is done. And look, just start. And then if you slip, you've missed out a few days, whatever, just restart. Keep going. But there was another dilemma here, right? Because what Jesus faced here in this dilemma was that it was also wise to avoid any untimely, direct confrontation and to avoid stirring unnecessary trouble. Why? It's not going to help the work of the ministry. Okay? Now, I'm not saying avoid all trouble or anything negative. What I'm saying is this requires wisdom and discernment to know, is this going to help us or is it not? But I want us to realize, right, obedience to God is not optional. Right? Now, coming back to that earlier part, right, we don't want to stir up this untimely direct confrontation or unnecessary trouble. Okay, we get that. But recognize this, not stirring up premature hostility, because remember, ultimately, the hostility will be there against Jesus. They will put him to death. Right? But not stirring this thing up prematurely can be solved in many ways. How? Not by total avoidance, but by creative solutions. Why? Because ultimately, you still have to reconcile the other part, which is what? Attending the festival, obeying God. In other words, it's not optional. It's not negotiable. All right? Think about this, right? How will you and I decide on such matters? Because when we're faced with this kind of what seems to be a dilemma, now most people, this is what will happen, right? The fearful will choose to compromise. Right? Self-preservation will kick in. Right? We'll put self-preservation before obedience to God. What would the stubborn and the prideful do? Oh, the stubborn and the prideful, now here's the thing. They will beat their chest, right? With this bravado, this false bravery. And what happens? They will just boldly blunder into trouble and probably make things worse. All right, that's what the stubborn and prideful will do. But understand this, right? The spirit-led will understand not every hill is worth dying on. Let me explain this. Not every battle is worth fighting. You get that? You have to be wise. Not every issue is worth going directly all out to deal with. This idea here is this, right? We're going to defend this hill, right? So even if it means we die on that hill, now, not every hill is worth dying on. And God must give us wisdom to direct us as to, one, which battles must be fought. Those are non-negotiable. Two, which battles can be fought differently. These we require us to be strategic. Three, which battles are not worth fighting, right? Because they have zero strategic value. Move on. Ignore it. Sometimes let time take care of things, which is why the right timing is also important. Okay? Sometimes time will take care of the matter. Right? We don't have to rush or blunder into everything. And so realize this, right? As Jesus weighed in on this decision, there was another issue that he had to deal with, which was the family pressure that was put on him concerning what to do. All right? And so that leads me to my next point here, resisting the pressure. Look at verse 3 and 4, right? There were different types of pressure that was upon him. Okay? One, the pressure from external expectations. Verse 3 and 4, his brethren therefore said unto him, in other words, these are Jesus, right, his own brothers and sisters. Okay? This is what the scripture says, right? His own brethren. That means Joseph and Mary had other children after Jesus was born. Okay? There is no perpetual virgin doctrine in the Bible. It says here, his brothers and sisters right now, they said to him, his family, his siblings, he said, all right, depart hence and go into Judea, that thy disciples also may see the works that thou doest. Now, this is for there is no man that doeth anything in secret, and he himself seeketh to be known openly. If thou doest these things, show thyself to the world. Now, what are they saying? They told him, right, go to Jerusalem, right, go into Judea. Why? So that people can see all your works, right? His miracles and whatever is preach, listen to him preach, his ministry, right? All those things. Now, why? They were using their own reasoning. They said, well, this is what you must do. If you're really who you say that you are, these are the things you must do. Why? Because no one will do all these things quietly in secret. In other words, no one will do this. If you have a ministry, why do this in obscurity? You get what I'm saying here? It says, and he himself seeketh to be known openly. So it says, you would be, they told Jesus, right, you would be wanting to be known, to be popular, to have the broadest, exposure. So if thou doest these things, show thyself to the world. Now, you have to understand one thing here. They use worldly wisdom, right? Assuming that every successful prophet or spiritual ministry will have popularity. They don't know their Bible, because if you look through the Old Testament, you're going to see most of the prophets were very lonely people. They didn't have a lot of friends. Right? The message that they had to bear, right, representing God, didn't make them very popular with the masses. Okay? One pastor that I had, who's no longer with us, when I was a young Christian, he always reminded me, he says, the Old Testament prophets, majority of them walked alone. Don't be afraid of that. Now, they demanded from him, right? It says, they demanded public validation. In other words, if you're really who you are, whatever, now go there, right? Make yourself known, speak to the largest possible crowds, whatever. Why? Because they wanted to see in him, right, in Jesus, their own brother, a vote of public approval for his ministry. Why? They challenged his authority. They didn't think he was who he said he was. Okay? Now, if you look at verse 5, you see there was the pressure on him to prove himself. For neither did his brethren believe in him. They eventually did, many of them. Okay, later on, including one of his brothers, one of the early pastors in the first church in Jerusalem, and he was martyred, was killed. But there was the pressure, right? Now, his own brothers and sisters, they did not believe in him, but they were pushing him to seek this external validation. In other words, if you're really who you are the chosen one of God, the Messiah, the Savior of the world. Now, then go to Jerusalem, right? And then what they're asking him is that, right, when you are successful, then we will believe. But that's not real faith. Right? That's different. It's like, that's the person walking by, and then he's noticing, oh, there's a long queue for this, right, stall, for this restaurant. I don't know what it is. I have no idea, but must be good. So, why? Because they're not evaluating this. To them, you don't know what's going on, whatever, but you're using this external validation. In other words, realize this, right? His brothers and sisters now, they did not want to look foolish by following or backing the wrong preacher. But the problem was this, they were unable to discern for themselves whether or not he spoke the truth. So what were they depending on? Oh, let's go online, we check the reviews. All right? Let's go online on Google, check, all right, RBC, whatever, see how many likes there are, how many subscribers, right, to the channel, and so on and so forth. And, if there are millions, then it must be okay. No, actually, who has the largest audiences? The cults. You know which is the number one, the largest printing organization in the world? Watchtower, the Jehovah's Witnesses. They have printed more literature, books, booklets, and whatever, than any other organization on earth. But you see, people sometimes don't want to look foolish. Now, I've called this type of thing out before. And guess what? It didn't make me very popular either. Because why? I said, look, if you don't think this is right for you, whatever, right, vote, make a decision, right, replace the pastor, And then I will abide by that. I will help you find a replacement. But sometimes people don't want to look like they're on the wrong side of history. So they go with the flow, even though they're not with this. Now, and here his family members, now understand this. Jesus in the last chapter, now he told a number of people to go back. Because they were following for all the wrong reasons. That was, right, but again, this idea was like, well, if you're like, you're who you say you are, or I think in Singlish, over here, what do we say? Oh, you're so smart, then you do this law, you show us law. What was the whole point? You prove to us. All right? And there was this pressure to seek this validation, right? Now, this pressure can also come not from external, but on ourselves also. Okay? Now, Jesus makes this observation, right? In Mark 6, verse 4, but Jesus said unto them, a prophet is not without honor, but in his own country and among his own kin and in his own house. All right? So here, this prophet, any prophet says, will receive honor except among his own people, his own relatives, and his immediate family. Why? As the English saying goes, right? Familiarity breeds contempt. Okay? I asked my pastor, back when we were in California, he told me after he surrendered, he went to the ministry, he went to Bible school, he graduated. Now, he then went on to pastor a different church. I said, why didn't you go back to your hometown, whatever? He said, it would have been very difficult. All right, this is his wisdom. He said, why? Because it's very hard to pastor a church full of people who have seen you in diapers before. All right, as we say here, it's like, imagine the older members are saying, I've eaten more salt than you have eaten rice. And he says here, a prophet is without honor, but in his own country, among his own kin, and in his own house. And so look at verse 5 and 6. And he could there do no mighty work, save that he laid his hands upon a few sick folk and healed them, and he marveled because of their unbelief. Okay? And now, this works, humanly speaking, now this works on us because now someone can preach, right? I can preach week after week here. Maybe I go on a trip, and guess what? It's very likely I'm going to get much better reception over there. Why? I'm new. Simple as that. I'm the guest preacher. And this is just human nature. Over there, guess what? The pastor there may be also looking, wow, how come this guy gets more, there's more response when the guest preacher comes, but not when the pastor there is preaching. But guess what? It's universal. Okay? But can I say this also? We're not here doing this in order to receive the praises of men, right? Or to be patted on the back all the time. Okay? Anyone who's seeking that is going to quit very early. They'll never last. Right? This is not a complaint about people, but I'm saying there is an aspect of human nature here. And now, understand this, right? As a man, 100% man and 100% God, now Jesus himself would be facing this kind of pressure. Doesn't mean that he gives into that. All right? But what he faces is real. Then there is the pressure of perceived urgency. Why? Because remember, this time of the feast, right, is coming up. Guess what? There is a very hard deadline there. Okay, it requires the Feast of Tabernacles now requires preparation. You need time to prepare. You need time to make the journey. Right? It's going to take time to travel there. You cannot just say, okay, I want to be there now and I want to arrive there 5 minutes from now. It doesn't work that way. Okay? Yeah, I know, it's Jesus. But even so, he cannot cheat and say, well, I'm going to teleport there. So there's this urgency, right? The time is coming up. And look at verse 6. Then Jesus said unto them, my time is not yet come. Right? They told him, go down, show yourself, prove yourself there. He said, but your time is always ready. Okay, I want to point out, he's not in a hurry to make haste, even though the deadline is coming. Whereas, from the world's perspective, right, what happens? The time is always now. Right? What are you waiting for, Jesus? Right? This thing's coming up. Go. Right? Your time is always ready. Now, it's said about those who have time blindness, right? And it's very common if you have ADHD, that our concept of time is this: not now or now. There's no other time like that. And here for them, it's very similar, right? The time, this now, you go. Is it? No. All right, my time is not yet come. There is a right time for everything, and today is made worse in our modern world, right? Because we are addicted to instant everything, right? And we expect God to work our way on our schedule. And again, the Lord had to deal with this more than once. Now, look at John 2, verse 3 and 4. All right, this was what? The first miracle that Jesus actually performed, right, at a wedding. And when they wanted wine, the mother of Jesus, right, that's Mary, they said unto him, they have no wine. They're whining that they have no wine. No, okay. Okay. Jesus said unto her, woman, what have I to do with thee? He said, mine hour is not yet come. Isaiah 55, verse 8 and 9. It said, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Understand this. God works differently from you and I. We need to have, get into the Word of God, right, to understand the mind of the Lord, rather than to expect Him to fit into the way that you and I want Him to work. Right? Understand, His ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. By the way, His schedule is not your schedule. Okay, because a lot of times we expect something to be done now, our way, and in this time frame, but a lot of times, if that's what we expect, we will be very disappointed. All right? The best thing I can offer to everyone is this: we continue to pray. And if you've been there, right, throughout, from over the weeks and months in the prayer meetings, one thing you're going to observe is this. Time and time again, there are things that we don't know how or what the Lord is going to do or how to work it out, but guess what? We continue praying and then the breakthrough comes. Why? Not because we engineered something, but because the Lord opens a way. And that means, dearly beloved, right, we have to be patient. We have to increase our dependence on the Lord, rather than, because of the urgency, what do? We take things into our own hands. I have so many times I got into trouble with church members because why? I have to pull people back from trying to take things into their own hands because why? They're in a hurry. Why? Because we experience this emotional thing that's bothering us because why? This thing is unresolved. It is open-ended. We don't like that. It makes us uncomfortable. We want to feel, right, more comfortable about this thing. And guess what? You are not going to get any comfort outside of the comfort of God. And that peace is not going to come to you until you hand yourself and what happens and the outcome and everything that you're asking for to the Lord. But why people wrestle and get into all this? Because we are fighting for control and trying to wrestle that from God. When we ought to be increasing our dependence on Him and our level of surrender. Hand the matter over to Him. And I say this with regards to every decision or matter that there is an urgency. I understand that part. Right? But we expect God to function our way. And then realize this. the pressure also came from the hostile opposition, right? John 7:7, it says, the world cannot hate you, but me it hated. Because I testify of it, that the works thereof are evil. Now, Jesus understood, right? Okay, because he is on the right track, guess what? That's why there's this growing hostility. He's speaking the truth. He is actually hitting on target, and that's why this is happening. Right? One of the illustrations that preachers sometimes will say is this, right? When you're preaching and then people react negatively, now they point out and say, you know what? When you throw a rock into a dark alley, the dog that yelps the loudest is the one that you hit. You can't see it. You're not aiming for it. But if you throw something out there and you hit it, guess what? It's going to make the most noise. And the world says that they hated him because he spoke the truth, right? He shed light, it exposed their true nature, right? And there was hostility. Now, this happens sometimes even among God's people. I mean, even the Apostle Paul experienced this, right? Because, right, the natural response is opposition. Galatians 4 verse 16, Paul asked the churches in Galatia this question, am I therefore become your enemy because I tell you the truth? Now, implicit in what Paul is saying here is this. He doesn't hate them, right? He's not being malicious. It's not like he dislikes them. But in telling the truth, he's doing it for their sake. He loves them. Even if sometimes this is uncomfortable. Right? And the exposure truth will bring out the hostility and also the avoidance. John 3 verse 19 and 20 now. And this is the condemnation. It says that light is come into the world and men love darkness rather than light. What's the nature of fallen man? All right, as sinners, we love darkness more than light. Why? Because their deeds were evil. For everyone that doeth evil hated the light, neither cometh to the light, lest his deeds should be reproved. Which is why, you know what, his brothers and sisters, their reasoning would have been nonsense, because if Jesus brings this out even to the widest possible audience, guess what? A lot of them will avoid, they will hate this. Why? Because it exposes them for their true nature. Verse 21, but he that doeth truth. Now this is speaking about what? The saved, right? He that doeth truth cometh to the light, that his deeds may be made manifest, that they are wrought in God. It's not to boast of our own righteousness, but it is to show or to demonstrate what God is doing in us. But you'll notice, they avoid the light. I learned this a long time ago as a child. I used to hate. You know, when you live in a house, and my parents had a rented house. The kitchen was one of the places I hated the most, because at night there are lots of creatures. Right? I discovered one thing: you switch on the lights, all the cockroaches scatter. And realize this spiritually, right? In our lost condition, that's what we do. We avoid the light. Right? The light is harsh. Okay? We need bright light to show up stains that need to be removed. But at the same time, the bright light will also validate or confirm if a surface is actually very clean. Now, we discussed a number of types of pressure, right? Social pressure, right? Family pressure, right? There's pressure to be validated, right? There was time pressure, right? There's a deadline, and then oppositional pressure. So, how would Jesus deal with all this? Right? And what he did was this: by retreating strategically. Okay? There was a purposeful plan and also a refusal to go along with their agenda. Look at verse 8 and 9. Now he tells his brothers and sisters, right? Go ye up unto this feast. I go not up. Notice the next word. And you can put that in bracket, whatever, yet. He didn't say he was not going. although I think it gave the impression he is not going. Right? I go not up yet unto this feast. Now he says, for my time is not yet full come. When he had said these things, these words unto them, he abode still in Galilee. Right? So he remained behind. He told them, okay, you all go ahead. Go without me. Why? Because he resisted the agenda for them, that they wanted him to be made a public spectacle in Jerusalem. He refused, their timing and this urgency. Why? So that he could remain in control of his ministry. Right? He's not reacting to anything that people are saying, even if it's his own brothers and sisters. Now, by the way, a lot of times the greatest pressure is going to come from what? Family members. Their opinions, what they say, whatever, will influence and will affect us the most. All right? But what did he do? He said, he told them, you go ahead, right? And then he remained in Galilee. Now, but look at what happened in the next verse, right? Verse 10. After this family had left, he went up to Jerusalem secretly. But when his brethren were gone up, then went he also up onto the feast. Now, it says not openly, but as it were in secret. So I mean, mentally, I have this picture that he's going there, he's got his headdress on, he puts a scarf, whatever to cover his face, whatever you only see his eyes, maybe he changes his clothes and he just goes in quietly. He's not striking a conversation. This journey will take some time. He's not like talking to people, not introducing himself, whatever. He's keeping very quiet and he's just minding his own business. Right? Now, but I want us to see something very important. This is not a retreat in the sense of a retreat from the truth or from doing the work of God. It is a retreat for the truth. Okay? He chose not to go yet into Jerusalem with his family where he could be recognized. Okay? And there's wisdom behind all this because realize, if he just went in and if everyone could recognize him, right, trouble begins immediately. And guess what? Everyone would have been distracted by the controversy. All right. They are not tuning in or listening to the truth anymore. And therein lies the problem, right, among some, okay, who claim to be Bible thumping, Bible preaching, conservative and fundamental preachers. Some people, all they do is to court and to stir controversy. Then you got the other extreme people who avoid all that, avoid any possible form of offense, right? They'll bend over, compromise on everything just so that they can be liked. And both are problematic. Okay? Why? Because this confrontation, this controversy will distract from the message if you're not careful. Okay? And this calls for wisdom in terms of what we do. Now look at Matthew 10, verse 16. This is what the Lord himself tells us. Behold, I send you forth as sheep, notice, in the midst of wolves. Isn't that sending sheep into a hostile situation? All right? But then it says, be ye therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves. All right? Now, how long is it now? 24 years where I've been involved in pastoral ministry, this is what I see. A lot of times Christians don't do this. All right? They're wise as doves and harmful as serpents. Even on Sunday, even in church. All right? They bite, and they're venomous and they bite each other. Now he says what? Be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. It's like the doctor's oath, right? Do no harm. Why? Because why did he refuse to follow along with whatever the agenda, what his brothers and sisters said? Simple. Their plan will provoke more confrontation. It will play into the enemy's hands. It will create unnecessary risk for no gain. It will distract totally from his message. Now, he didn't come to cause controversy. He came to bring the light and the truth of the gospel to everyone, right? To call all men to salvation. It wasn't to fight as many fights and to strive with people. And by the way, realize this, right? Even when you look at the spiritual qualifications even of the pastor, he's not to be someone who is a brawler, to be someone who's contentious, to be striving with people all the time. Neither is he a softie. Okay? The whole point is we don't fight for the sake of fighting. Right? We don't contend for the sake of being contentious. Right? Because what? It is not about us. It is about the Lord, about God, about the truth, about His light. And so, ultimately, it is about what? Fulfilling the will of God. And so, the wisdom behind his secret entry was he needed to make sure that the goal, right, will be met. To fulfill the requirement. Now, what was the requirement? Well, he has to be at the feast. What was the other requirement? He came to do the will of the Father and to preach the gospel. All right. Psalm 40 verse 8, I delight to do thy will, oh my God, yet the law is within my heart. All right. He has to fulfill the requirement. He maintained control of the timing. He knows the timing. And the timing, he will not allow anyone to force his hand to do it prematurely. Neither is he going to procrastinate. All right. And to avoid needless conflict. Now, this was even prophesied, right? In Isaiah 42, look at verse 1. Behold, my servant whom I uphold, notice this, mine elect, in whom my soul delighteth. I put my spirit upon him. We're spirit-led, we are not hasty. We are not impulsive. He shall bring forth judgment to the Gentiles. Verse 2 and 3, he shall not cry nor lift up. Right, the idea is lifting up his voice. He's not going to cry out loud. He's not going to lift up his voice just to draw attention. No, nor cause his voice to be heard in the street. Now, if you and I are selling something in the street, what will we do? We will go right, ice cream, Okay, one pastor I know, he explained when he was young, we had to sell, puto. Right, on the streets, what happens? He had to shout, and so his voice is rough. Damage his voice. Now, the Lord, He's not going to do that. It says, a bruised reed shall He not break. Okay, the reed is already bruised. Yet He's not going to break or snap it. He's gentle. And the smoking flax shall He not quench. He shall bring forth judgment unto truth. Right? As a gentle shepherd. Now, why? The message may be seen as offensive, as hard-hitting to some people, but ultimately, what's happening? We're dealing with people. All right? We're dealing with people, and we have to be gentle at the same time. We have to be kind. All right? We're spiritually, the New Testament church is on a search and rescue mission. We're not there in the search and rescue to abuse people. So what are the results of Jesus' strategy? All right, we're not going to go into, there's some stuff that we'll have to deal with in the next message, but I just want to briefly look at this, right? What was the result? Well, there was much talk and attention as a result of him not being there, whereas a direct confrontation would have actually been a distraction. Now look at verse 11 and 12. Then the Jews sought him at the feast and said, where is he? Right, they're looking all over. There was now the expectation. Right? They were looking around. In other words, at this feast, he became the main topic by not being there. Right? There was the anticipation. And there was much murmuring among the people concerning him. Right? This murmuring has this idea of grudging. It was quiet debate. People were muttering. Okay, this was not out loud or in the open, but quietly people were talking and whatever. Now, there was a lot of word of mouth. Right? There was much murmuring among the people concerning him. And again, what happens? The attention now was drawn to him rather than to the controversy. For some said, he is a good man. Others said, nay, but he deceiveth the people. All right? Now, I want us to see this. This is also a softer approach. He didn't show up contrary to the expectations, but it got people talking. Right? There was a word of mouth effect. Why? Because his followers and disciples, they were talking. They were speaking up. Right? They were defending him. Even the enemies were talking about him. And realize in verse 14, he will eventually actually teach openly. Right? But all this had the effect of now warming up the crowd. Right? Warming up the audience. Now, realize this, right? This happened despite the hostile and fearful environment or atmosphere created by the leaders. All right, look at verse 13. Howbeit, no man spake openly of him. Why? For fear of the Jews. Okay, this word, fear, in Greek, phobos, from which you get the word phobia. All right. Talks about this fear, this dread, this terror. They were fearful of the response of the Jewish leaders. Now, they were afraid that they might get excommunicated, right? Kicked out of the synagogue. They were afraid of being ostracized or being shamed. There was a fear there could be economic consequences. You could lose your business, lose all your customers. Now, I want to just focus on point of application here, right? Realize this. We need to be strategic. Strategic wisdom beats direct confrontation. Okay? Wives, take note. Okay? Going direct, it doesn't always work. In fact, most of the time, it won't work on a man. Try something else. Be creative. All right? And I want to just bring up, right, this concept of a gambit. Chess players will be familiar with this. All right? A gambit is a move where you play. It looks like you are giving up ground. It looks like maybe you are sacrificing certain pieces, right? Your opponent will take those pieces. But the idea was in the gambit is that when you give up the ground or sacrifice a piece, you're actually gaining an advantage. Right? It creates new possible opportunities that would not have existed on the chessboard before. Ultimately, this is a move that brings you to a strategic victory. Right? But this calls for, in all these things, we need to be wise, we need to be patient and gentle. Right? In terms of what we do. Look, there are many ways to bring across to someone that all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Right? The soul that sinneth, shall die. Right? That is appointed on the man once to die, but after that, is the judgment. We can do it out of love and concern, or we can, literally what some people do, they will point that finger and spit right into that person's face. And that's not, you have told them, you have not communicated this to them. Because ultimately, the message must be received. That's your goal, isn't it? And so, any caution, we need to be patient and gentle, right? Proverbs 25, verse 15, for by long forbearing is a prince persuaded. Right? How do you deal with, especially someone in authority? Right? It could be a prince, it could be, let's say, your boss, it could be, your big boss, whatever. Long forbearing. You need to be patient, right? And notice, and a soft tongue breaketh the bone. Okay? If only more people will take this to heart when they say something online. Right? It says, a soft tongue breaketh the bone. Now, this requires self-control, long forbearing. Right? It requires wisdom in the approach, right? Instead of choosing a harsh tongue or tone, a soft tongue. But notice, ultimately, it is not to compromise the goal. This accomplishes the goal despite the resistance. Right? A soft tongue, it says, what does it do? It was able to break even bones. Right? And bones, by the way, are hard. Okay? Human bones are very hard. And yet here it says a soft tongue. Now, as we close, right, I want us to think about this, right? As we've seen today, truth-telling in hostile times requires both courage and wisdom. Right? And Jesus laid the example, shows us the best way to speak truth. And that it isn't always about directly getting into someone's face, but being strategic and being wise about it. Okay? And just like a chess player, what happens? A gambit, it might look like we're losing ground, but it actually gains an advantage. Right now, Solomon himself, he tells us, right, by long forbearing is a prince persuaded, and a soft tongue breaketh the bone. Now, in our hostile times today, speaking the truth will definitely face fierce opposition. Right? But I want to remind everyone, not every hill is worth dying on. Okay? But our obedience to the Lord is also not negotiable. And by the way, we will be facing, right, in the coming years, right, the possibility of more restrictions on what can be said or not said. Okay? Whether it is in the public and secular space or even what can be preached. Okay? Right now, even there is a new amendment or law that is going to be debated in Parliament that will affect churches. But realize this, right? Obedience to God is not negotiable. But how we go about doing things, okay, there's always more than one way. Right? As they say, there are multiple ways to skin a cat. Please don't do that. I like cats. But there's more than one way. Right? I remember years back, my lecturer would tell us, okay, I think it was my math lecturer, that I can touch my nose like this. Right, Jack? I can touch my nose like this, or I can touch my nose this way. Not anymore. I'm a bit old and I think of arthritis. Okay. But he said there's more than, he was trying to point out, right? There's more than one way. And we need godly wisdom to know how to pick our battles. All right? Now, it's about, I think it's been maybe about 18 years ago, I had a conversation with a veteran pastor, right? Fourth generation pastor. Right? His father, his grandfather, great-grandfather were all pastors, Baptist pastors. And he wisely, very shrewdly, very wisely said this, pick your battles. You don't have to rush into deal with everything. Right? Strategic wisdom will accomplish more than direct confrontation. And patient persistence will break down resistance. Okay? But realize this, right? Obeying God and speaking His truth, it is not negotiable. So do not compromise. We focus instead on how do we be more effective. But understand this, He allows us, right, to be creative in how we do this, as long as it is scriptural. But realize why do a lot of people get into trouble? Or they blunder into trouble? Because we need to communicate the truth so that it is received. Right? It's not just about that someone hurt us or that we told them. What's the message received? Right? Men, we need to consider that when we communicate with our wives. Right? Or our children. Ladies, we need to do that. Right? And it's not just about telling your husband, but communicating so that he understands. Now, as is now tradition, now as we wrap up here, just one final image. All right. The truth is seeking your voice. All right, as we close, let's commit to being both faithful and wise in serving the Lord and in truth-telling, even though you and I may be in a hostile environment or climate. But remember, our goal isn't about just telling or throwing the truth at them, but is winning in the persuasion. It's not winning the argument. It is about persuading. All right? And that means learning from Jesus and his example, we may have to take a very different approach, right, in terms of what we do. Now, a lot of what most people think today is Bible preaching. It's a lot of shouting and thumping the Bible, right? Getting into someone's face and spitting, but I think where is the persuasion? And where is the care and concern? Because ultimately, that's why we do what we do. Right? And may we just follow our master. Okay, anyone here, if you are concerned, you have a family member, a loved one, children, right, grandchildren, nephews, nieces, whoever. Listen, just getting into their faces is not going to get the message across. And let's be very wise, right, about how we do it. Because remember, a soft tongue, right, breaketh bones. The preacher doesn't always have to be shouting and shouting and shouting. In my preaching trips, this is one of the things that happened. Some of them told me after the first few times they kind of went into shock because they didn't know, they weren't used to, right, preaching more than 45 minutes. But they also weren't used to this, that I wasn't necessarily yelling and spitting and shouting all the time. Because that's what they were used to. And because it can become a substitute for the message. Anything, like as I pointed out, right, that the Lord Jesus did here was to avoid anything that distracts from the message. Okay? So let's be clear about this, right? And let us, at the same time, continue to be faithful in obedience, right? Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you